Just give me a moment. Okay, everybody. Apologies for the delay. There was little issues with the connectivity. Seems.
Okay. Would you like me to just launch in, or any introduction?
No, I will introduce you, Chris. Just take a moment. Just introduce you. And the plan is that you can start off with your session. Once you are done, we will take questions on the chat, and I will read out the questions for you. So that it will be easier for you to just answer them as they come in at the end of the session. Is that all right?
That's super. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you everybody for joining in. Let me introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Chris Bowden. Chris, it's a pleasure to have participants today. Dr. Chris Bowden is the Globally Threatened Species Officer for the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, RSPB. And his primary roles right since 2004 has been coordinating the Asian Vulture Programme in South Asia. He is currently the program manager for SAVE, that is the Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, a consortium of regional and international organizations which are committed to the conservation of vultures in South Asia. Chris is also the co-chair of the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group, right since its formation in 2011. And he is also the leading authority of vultures in India. We're very, very happy to have you here, Chris. And we look forward to learning a lot more about the current status of the conservation efforts for vultures in Asia. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, and really great to be with you, and thank you for inviting me this evening. So, as mentioned, although I'm work for RSPB, but I am based here in Bangalore for the last more than 7 years, and I've been on the Vulture Programme since 2004. Of course, I worked in the just in the sort of 5 years before starting on it was 20 years ago. So it's very nice to be back. So the talk that I'm going to present is trying to give you an overall perspective, and I will end up talking more specifically about South India, but I've given a couple of presentations recently, and this will be broadly quite similar to those. So if anybody caught any of those, there will be quite a bit of that you will have seen before. But I want to make it as relevant as possible to South India. But I have to issue warnings like this for but I was active before launching in on India's and then South India's vulture situation and populations. So condors worldwide, and in fact India hosts 9 of those 23, so we've got a high proportion of the world's vultures are here in India, and I would, well, 7 of those occur frequently or infrequently in South India. So, but I mean, they are quite a diverse group, but there's a big block of Gyps vultures, that's the Griffin vultures, which are the predominant ones here, and I'll end up talking more about those. Here's a slightly more friendly picture of the world, and of course, as you are red list species on a global scale, and in fact, I've just got news yesterday that one more, in fact, the Andean condor will be joining as well. So it's going to even higher proportion of red list species among the vultures, but different threats in different parts of the world which are really pushing vultures into that red list. And there was a recent exercise to look at the threats and causes of decline across all of the old world, and this shows the predominant threats in different parts of Africa. So it's interesting that although they're very threatened, it's not just one threat that's universal worldwide, but probably the most widespread among the threats is threat of people trying to poison normally other species, although in some cases, in Africa in particular, people deliberately try to poison vultures, either to stop them showing the authorities where there's been poaching of elephants or rhinos in southern Africa, to what we carefully term belief-based use, and we don't believe there's any true medicinal value to vulture parts, but unfortunately some people do think there is, in West Africa in particular, and that's led to a lot of deliberate attempts to poison, usually, but other ways of killing vultures to use their parts. But on top of that, there's food shortage plays a role in some areas, but in fact in Asia, and particularly in South Asia, there's one very special threat which I hope you all are familiar with, but I'll be coming to that in a moment. So just closing in now a bit more on Asian vultures, and here is a recent summary of the the population status of all the vulture species found in India. And you'll see, I mean, at the top, white rumped vulture, which was thought to be the most abundant large raptor in the entire world 20 years ago. The global population of that species is now, very sadly, just 8,600 individuals, most of which are in India, of course. Long-billed vulture has 30,000 birds in India, and slender-billed vulture, of course, found in northeast India, in particular, the rarest of the vultures worldwide now. Red-headed vulture, of course, does occur down here and is another critically endangered species. Egyptian vulture is also classified as endangered. So there's plenty going on. And so I just wanted to very quickly touch on the challenge of identification of vultures. Of course, bearded vulture is one of the two that's not in South India, but is probably the nice, straightforward and easy one to identify, and Egyptian vulture. But the Gyps vultures, so the Griffin vultures, which here they are. I mean, red-headed vultures more straightforward, but the the actual identification of these in adult plumage is fairly doable and reasonably straightforward. It's because most of them take 5 years to mature, and the transition plumages between first year and adult are really quite confusing. And go into them here, I'm afraid, but that's something which will be really would be really helpful to have a more detailed portrayal and study to with all the different age classes of the different species. Okay, so moving on to the Indian context, and of course Jatayu in the Hindu mythology is a very special place for, and it does seem very clear that was a vulture, not just any large raptor. The Parsi community obviously have a very special place for vultures, with sky burials in the Towers of Silence, as do many of the Himalayan communities, where it's usually Himalayan griffins that are the disposing of human dead. And of course, for the Parsis, that's very much been integral to moving to the next world. But for most of South Asia, vultures have just been really important part of the scene and cleaners of the environment. And these extraordinary densities that were found in North India, I don't think that there were ever quite these kind of scenes in South India, but really artificially high populations. And I mean, it's very difficult to get a clear population estimate, but 40 million vultures in India alone seems to be a very sensible, educated guess on the numbers that there would have been 20 years ago. And yeah, these scenes speak for themselves. And of course, 40 million vultures, you can quickly do a calculation. We know that they eat 3 to 4 kilograms of meat a week each. And so that quickly comes to 12 million tons of rotting meat that they would have disposed of 20 years ago. And now, with populations so seriously depleted, that's no longer happening. And there is some very good evidence that feral dogs have partially filled that niche, and feral dog populations, and of course there are still up to 7,000 human cases of rabies a year in India. So a human health link there is a clear one. So 30% increases in feral dog populations in the early 2000s, which correspond quite neatly with the disappearance of the vultures. And it's difficult to absolutely prove that link, but I think the implications are clear. There are other health and environmental benefits to not having those rotting carcasses lying around. And the population trends, so little data from before people started noticing that vultures had gone, but thankfully Vibhu Prakash and BNHS team had counted vultures in a survey in 1992, which has given some sort of baseline to compare. And this graph here it may not look that dramatic, but that is plotted on a logarithmic scale. So that decline on a logarithmic scale is absolutely an extinction decline. And this is where I have to show a further slide of warning, because the main culprit emerged in 2003, 2004 for these declines. And the science behind this is absolutely clear cut, and it's something which is, I mean, I think it took many people and veterinarians and conservationists alike quite a while to really comprehend and believe that this veterinary drug, which is a painkiller used for cattle, it's relatively safe for cattle and even for humans. It's a very common drug in human medicine. But unfortunately for vultures, there's something about their metabolism which means that, and there are a couple of PhDs studying exactly why they're so sensitive to diclofenac, but a treated cow, if it dies within 2 or 3 days of being treated with diclofenac, is absolutely toxic to vultures, and one kept them feeding on the meat of that cow. So that has been the clear and main cause for those declines. I mean, other factors I'll come to in a bit, but diclofenac accounts for that decline, and the science behind it, the references are there. One of the symptoms, or a sort of main symptom, which all the dead vultures in the early 2000s and that all had visceral gout, these crystals on their kidneys, acid crystals, which eventually kill the vulture after 2 or 3 days, usually. So it actually causes kidney failure in the birds, and that's what they die of. I could explain that in a bit more detail if anyone wants. So, but I think most of this is familiar to people by now. I hope it is, and do read more if you're interested. But back in 2004, when I was brought in from other critically endangered species that I was involved with beforehand to help coordinate on the vultures, this was basically the job description: was remove diclofenac from the environment in veterinary use, which would involve finding a safe alternative, and secondly, establishing a breeding program to secure the future of 3 species, and so that in case we really couldn't get the diclofenac out of the environment quickly enough, but also as a prospect for future release program. So that was the challenge, and BNHS was very much involved, and so I mean, my role is very closely linked to BNHS's work on this, and I'm in touch with them on almost a daily basis ever since 2004. But getting the well, actually, a key step was finding a safe alternative, and thankfully we managed to do that remarkably quickly within a year or so of finding that diclofenac was the problem, and meloxicam was found to be a safe alternative with similar properties, and this was crucial. Pradipto Ghosh was then the Secretary of Ministry of Environment in Delhi, and he was listening carefully and really helped push for the ban, and the Prime Minister or BNHS managed to get him to see a short video about it, and all sorts of major publications were crucial. A Mike Pandey film, various other publicity, and then of course lobbying key government officials and the conservation community to get that. So that step was taken in 2006. It was fully gazetted in 2008, but that ban of veterinary diclofenac has probably saved vultures from total extinction. I would now say that with some confidence, because it has brought down the use of veterinary diclofenac. It hasn't stopped it, as I'll be coming on to say. The bans, I mean, India led the way. Pakistan and Nepal followed almost simultaneously, but I think it was India's leadership which really gave them the confidence to do that. I think it's fair to say. Bangladesh was a bit later, and we've just had it and in Cambodia and managed to get a ban there. But unfortunately, the pharmaceutical companies cynically started producing large vials of human diclofenac, pretending that it was needed for hospitals, but it wasn't. It was just a very cynical way of making it readily available to vets who might want to illegally use the product in veterinary practice, because you only need 2 ml for a human being, and you need like 15 ml for a cow. So but thankfully by 2015 managed to restrict the vial size, so that was very important. And in fact, Madras High Court had a challenge by some of the companies, and Arulagam was central to helping convince various lawyers involved to uphold that ban, and so that is a further strengthening, but not complete stopping of diclofenac being used, because there's nothing still. Well, there is a law, but there's nothing. It's still quite possible, and we know that some vets take the tiny 3 ml vials and pull them together and use them in veterinary practice. So some of the vets, they really do, they like diclofenac. It's slightly faster acting than meloxicam, and you know, there are reasons why some vets have stubbornly stuck to it. So that's where we've got to on the advocacy side, and on the in situ conservation side, one further step and measure that can be taken is the creation of vulture safe zones, and those are 100-kilometre radius areas with basically just intensive advocacy going on at a more local level, and monitoring of the vultures and pharmacies in terms of which veterinary products are being used. And you'll see there, Arulagam again has initiated a vulture safe zone down here. I mean, that they need a bit more funding to be able to make that fully functional. And there was one on the coast in Maharashtra for a while, but actually, of the vulture safe zones now, the 2 here in Bangladesh they have been fully gazetted by government. So that's a really a much stronger step than has been taken in any of the other countries. The Nepalese have really pioneered this method, but in India, but I'm hoping that, and I think it would be something which to consider for doing more in the vulture safe zone theme, of getting these teams of 4, 5, 6 biologists and advocacy people to meet with the various key people involved and target groups. State officials, drug controllers, vet colleges, farmers groups, and such. Anyway, there's more about that on the SAFE website. So that's the in situ stuff. Ex situ, I mentioned that early ambition to have breeding program for the most threatened species, and that's something that again was taken up by BNHS. The first centre in Haryana is still very much the biggest one and holds nearly half of all the captive birds that are held these days. but it was drawing on expertise from all over the world, from California condor, Eurasian griffin work in Europe. We're lucky we've got experts like Jemima Parry-Jones and Zoological Society of London vets, but also IVRI involved in the various elements. And nobody had bred any of these species beforehand, so it was all new. And of course they don't breed until they're 5 years old, and most of the birds that were taken into the breeding program were young birds. So it was no surprise that it took a few years before we got BNHS got the first breeding in 2008, and now they're breeding quite prolifically, and in fact the cost of feeding them, and I'll talk about why the releases are going more slowly than we'd like, means that we're breeding almost we're almost having to stop them breed to keep it going. Not quite, but it's getting to that point. And it's really breeding on an industrial scale, I would say. These are like warehouses that have been built, colony aviaries, and they we're also, because they only lay one egg per year per season normally. But like for some other species like that if you remove the first egg at the right time and very carefully, you can artificially incubate it and induce the birds to lay a second egg, increase productivity, and then switch the chick back in to be taken care of by the adults, and you then hand rear the second juvenile, but together with other birds, so that there's no problem of imprinting on humans, and so that they are well-adjusted birds. And we know that they are. We've already got second generation breeders produced in this system, so it's looking all very good. This is a quick map showing where the breeding centres are. I mentioned Pinjore was the first one and still is the main one, and the four green dots are the BNHS run centres. There are some zoo initiatives, including one in Hyderabad, which have smaller scale breeding programs. And there's recent news, I understand, that there may be a further one in Karnataka, but I haven't got the full details on what's being planned there. I had hoped it might be at Ramnagara, but we'll find out more soon. Meanwhile, on an international scale, there's one centre in Nepal, on the edge of Chitwan National Park, and a further one in Changamanga in Pakistan. Both of those are only white rumped vultures, whereas several of these involve all three of the critically endangered Gyps vultures, and we now have over 100 slender-billed vultures in those centres. So I've sort of given you a quick run through of where we've got to broadly, or where we've got to recently, but in the process of getting to the point of that first breeding and things, and getting that initial ban, we realised that there was an urgent need for more coordination and a regional recovery plan, and to highlight work for external support. So we came up with the idea to create Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction consortium, and we're very honoured that Jarem Ramesh helped us launch this in Delhi, and we had another launch event in Kathmandu in Nepal. And we were also very honoured that perhaps the world's most famous and well-known raptor biologist, Professor Ian Newton, agreed to be the chair for the first 4 years. So it's been an absolutely a key credential has been to keep this consortium on a very carefully and clear, scientifically led track. So initially back in 2011, I think there were, first of all, there were 11 partners, 14 joined by the end of that year. We're now up to 24 partners, and those are in the 6 range countries of those 3 for critically endangered vultures, Gyps vultures in particular. So that's India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and most recently Myanmar has just joined. And you can see from those logos they are predominantly NGOs, but very importantly, they're not only NGOs, and IVRI, the Indian Veterinary Research Institute, is absolutely part of this, and the Forest Department and Wildlife Departments of Bangladesh and Nepal have formally signed up. But having said that, I mean, here in India, the MOEFCC is very much party to meetings and attends the meetings which are really crucial, and the Central Zoo Authority and various others. So, and just before I leave this slide, you'll notice there are 4 organisations at the bottom here which are SAVE Associates, and they're more local organisations, but carrying out absolute core priority work identified by the SAVE partnership. So those, whereas the others have a wider remit. And we meet once a year, usually in November, and it rotates between India and neighbouring countries, but probably more meetings have been in India than anywhere. This was last year's meeting held in Haryana, Himachal border, and we come together and we review a regional action plan. And this traffic light, or these blocks of colour on the left of the slide here, represent each of the actions which has been identified as an absolute priority for saving Asia's vultures from extinction. And the colour codes represent whether we are green on track, yellow a bit worried, or red really worried that we got to do more. So, and as you can see, there's a good mix and still plenty to do. You can download that regional action plan from the SAVE website. I think I've covered the threats. Well, I was just going to mention here on the threats, this is an extract from that overall summary of threats from all of Europe, Africa and Asia, but showing that the threats for South Asia are very much dominated still by the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. That includes diclofenac, but others unfortunately as well. Whereas Southeast Asia, where there are very small but important populations of white rumped and slender-billed and red-headed vultures, they have different threats there, and poison baits is probably the top one now, along with food shortage. Just for completion, there is also a further coordinating body through the government, with the 4 South Asian countries, called the Regional Steering Committee for Vultures, and that meets annually as well. So that is very much plugged in to the system. So how does South India fit in with the wider trends and initiatives? And I wanted to make reference here to a meeting that was held at the beginning of 2018, supported by Raptor Research Foundation and Rishad Naroji's foundation. And that meeting brought together all the experts from South India in a way that was quite refreshing, and it came up with some recommendations for India in the Indian context, which most of which are listed here. But before we go into the detail on those, I think one thing that became much clearer to me in the course of that meeting and other experience that was shared there and in the literature is that in South India, where there hasn't been the same superabundance of vultures as there was in the cowbelt states of North India, there was never the same real densities of vultures, but still they were common and widespread, and much more so than they are now. And it's absolutely clear to me that the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs have played the major role in that final demise. But I think it is also clear that the extensive farming here, and we were hearing a lot about that, and the fact that so many people let their cattle run free, and so they were very vulnerable to tigers and leopards, and there was a lot of poison baits going on in the sort of 20, 30, 40 years ago, which would have been impacting vulture populations. So perhaps some of the decline was in this part of the world might be attributable to that, along with slightly lower food abundance, keeping lower populations, but absolutely clear. And that, I mean, even in North India, where those superabundances were, talking to vets and talking to conservationists about whether enough diclofenac was being used to actually cause those declines. I mean, it's all every time it was, complete denial of no, it can't possibly be enough. But then when the figures all emerged on just how much, 11% of all dead cattle across the country contained diclofenac, and it actually passes through them in just over a week. So they've all died. 11% of all cattle had died within 3 or 4 days of being treated with diclofenac. Incredibly widespread use. So, and I'm sure that that's still very much part of the main driver for the declines in South India, as well as the rest of South Asia. So let's quickly run through the recommendations from that meeting 2 years ago. Strong endorsement of the removal of diclofenac and requests for governments to stop supplying the veterinary practices with any of the other drugs, which I'll mention in a minute in a little more detail, that others are also lethal to vultures, unfortunately, some of the other alternatives. But an important one, I think, is that there are synergies on the anti-poisoning efforts for tigers and getting these compensation schemes for villagers, so that if a tiger kills their cattle, they don't go out and try and poison the vulture, and poison the tiger and accidentally poison the vultures. It is really important, and I think there's more that we can do on that. Forest fires, certainly important, particularly in Bandipur area. A need for vulture centres as a sort of focal point for vulture efforts in South India. Also a recognition that power lines and wind turbines are a further threat, and a need for sensitivity mapping and disturbance needs to be controlled around any particular roost and breeding sites. And wild ungulates should not be buried, which some authorities are burying wild ungulates and instead of leaving them in the open for vultures to feed on. So that was those were the key points that were made. This was the meeting that was held, and the participants. But a final point from the meeting was, and a really key one, was establishing a South India Vulture Working Group with the aim to implement these actions and also to coordinate standardized surveys. And that has been set up and I think is struggling to get off the ground, but it is active, and there were named coordination people for each state. You can see them listed there and coordinated by Bharti Dasan from Arulagam. So that's something which I hope we can build on, and I hope that something may actually happen even this winter on trying to get a clearer baseline on the population levels across all of South India on a simultaneous effort. Okay, so a few further updates, and one thing that we managed to do, and the SAVE partners from India this year managed to produce a policy statement and summary for which is an 8-page brochure or leaflet, and that's this is my favourite and most, I think, the most important page of that leaflet, showing which of the drugs. I've mentioned that there are other drugs which are unsafe as well as diclofenac, but here you've got them listed and the references and reference material, which there's a lot more on the SAVE website. And unfortunately, I mean, there's 3 of them are absolutely have been confirmed by IVRI and others testing that they're unsafe, but only diclofenac is illegal at the moment. Nimesulide is a 4th one, which I'm very worried about. And I mean, in fact, if you go and ask to treat your cow in around Bangalore, this nimesulide is often the drug that comes up, and we're getting increasing numbers of dead vultures picked up with gout, same symptoms as with diclofenac, but no diclofenac and nimesulide in their tissues. But we need IVRI to do the safety testing. Pharmacy surveys, people going undercover to survey which drugs are offered. There's a paper that's just been accepted and some results that I'm sharing with you here from that paper, showing just how much of these other drugs are being used. This one is for nimesulide, and I mean this is meloxicam. I mean, meloxicam is doing quite well. I mean, Assam, for example, seems to be doing better than some states. There's a lot more detail on all this, and I don't have time to go into it all, but look out for that paper when it comes in 2 or 3 months, we hope. Aceclofenac is actually a drug which converts into diclofenac inside the cow or buffalo, and it can be in bolus form, but more worryingly, because the vets really like injectable forms of these drugs, it's increasingly being sold in injectable form. I'm hoping that something may happen on, and we've got requests in for removing that from the market, but so far we don't know whether those are going to be successful. So aceclofenac is another big worry. One good bit of news is that we've done safety testing of one drug called tolfenamic acid, and that testing has shown that it is actually safe for vultures. So there's just been being finalised in the next couple of months. We hope to be able to make an announcement. So that's a preliminary result at this stage, but hopefully the vets will like us slightly more than they do at the moment, because we keep telling them that various drugs they like using are toxic, highly toxic to vultures. So I've talked primarily about India, but in Nepal, where Vulture Safe Zone work has been more developed and more intensive than anywhere actually in India, the levels of diclofenac have gone really down lower, and to almost zero. There's still a little bit of nimesulide lurking, but the population trends and there of white rumped vultures have really a trend. At the moment, we don't, and in fact, sort of more. Some surveys carried out in Gujarat indicate that the population trends are still going down in India. Slender-billed vulture is also mentioned there. Yep. But in Nepal, we've been able to actually start releasing the vultures. We've had less problems trying to get satellite tagging permission. That's been one hold up with the releases here in India. Yes, this is a bird being fitted with a tag and into a pre-release aviary, and then that gate is open in the release aviary after several months of acclimatization, and the birds are now out and free flying. In fact, they didn't go very far for the first year or so, but just, I don't know, we don't quite understand why, but since the COVID pandemic, the birds have suddenly started going much further and into India in 3 cases, into UP. One of them's been picked up rather weak, but the others seem to be doing fine. So exciting stuff going on up there, and we're really looking forward to doing this in India. So far in India, we've just done preliminary releases of Himalayan griffins in Haryana, and last December in West Bengal as well. And we were all set to do our first white rumped vulture release in Haryana in March. Then COVID came along, and we're hoping to do maybe in October instead, after the monsoon is finished, COVID permitting. But that was just to mention Myanmar coming on board, but let's jump to the priority actions for South Asia. This is just a complete summary, and maybe it's better for me to let you read that rather than talk too much, although I guess I will keep talking. But the top of the priorities remains removing these toxic veterinary drugs. That is absolutely the priority. Making the diclofenac ban more, enforcing that more stringently, but these other drugs, aceclofenac, nimesulide, ketoprofen are, stand out. Tamil Nadu has actually stopped the distribution of aceclofenac and ketoprofen in the districts which have vultures. So Tamil Nadu is taking a lead within India in terms of trying to do something, but quite how effective that is, we don't yet really know. Bangladesh is also leading on the ketoprofen specifically, which for some reason Bangladesh ketoprofen is used much more predominantly in Bangladesh. So we're hopeful. We've got the vulture safe zone wide bans in place already there, and that's the two areas which have vulture still. But the rest of the country, well, we're looking for a national ban which will make it more effective. Hopefully we'll have a new drug, as I mentioned, but that needs publishing and promoting. Getting vulture safe zones happening on a wider scale is really important, and something which more people can be involved with, because I'm aware that I'm very conscious that it's quite hard for a lot of conservation organisations to engage with running a breeding centre or national level advocacy, but these vulture safe zones are something which can be monitoring drug availability, pharmacy surveys, and also monitoring causes of vulture mortality. And we need to be better at getting any dead vulture into a freezer or getting samples from it to find out what happened. But that's something which I'm hopeful that we're going to do more of, and if people, well, that may be a cause for engaging more widely and getting more people directly involved, which would be great. And hopefully these releases will add further profile. So are populations recovering? As I've said, I think I've covered it, but an interesting bit of news was the State of India's birds trends from that citizen science information shows that across India the trends for almost all the vultures remain serious ongoing declines. So far from any recovery being detected from that information. And what actions are needed in South India? Well, I think I've covered that already in terms of the recommendations from the workshop, but well, perhaps that's something that would welcome questions on for making those more effective. So that's where I'm going to wind up. Well, over the years of doing presentations, I must admit, it used to be so much doom and gloom. I think there are some real hopes that we're going to get somewhere. Do have a look at the SAVE website if you haven't done already. And if you're interested in receiving an email update when we do have significant things to say, it's only 3 or 4 or 5 emails a year, do drop me an email. My email address is at the bottom there. So thanks very much again, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Chris, this is Umesh. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think there are a whole bunch of questions that have come in on the chat. Let me just run through those, right? Just give me a moment.
Sure.
Okay, the first question is from Humayun Tahir. What is the current captive breeding population in the Hyderabad breeding center?
Okay. I'm trying to remember. Is there anyone on the call who can answer it more precisely than I can? Because I don't remember the exact figure. I would need to look it up. I think it's something like 12, I think. But please speak up if you know the exact answer, because I don't have time to grab it while we're on. I don't think they've managed to breed any successfully so far.
Okay. The next. Yeah, well, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Perhaps just on that, I would just say that one of the recommendations that we were told by the experts is that a breeding facility for these, and really to make it, as focused as it needs to be, ideally you would have the breeding facility away from the zoo. I mean, it's also a disease risk issue as well, and it does seem that the centres away from zoos are doing significantly better. But yes, sorry.
Right. Okay, the next question, also from Humayun. What is the status of the Gyps species in Sri Lanka?
Absolutely zero. It's an intriguing anomaly as far as I'm concerned, and I looked into this in some detail when we were doing that was a multi-species action plan, and there's the odd records of Egyptian vulture from there, but no Gyps vultures in recent history at least, so complete absence. And I would be interested to, I don't fully understand quite why.
Right. Okay, there is another question from Humayun too. If diclofenac, the illegal use, cannot be completely banned, is there a time after which the drug becomes inert? Could this be an alternate or a substitute where it is not possible to completely ban the drug?
Well, human diclofenac and veterinary diclofenac, unfortunately for the vultures, are exactly the same thing. So, and the use of diclofenac in human medicine, I mean, there have been times when we've been thinking the only solution is to get it banned in human medicine, but the uproar from that sort of language is just unbearable. So I think it will remain in. I mean, in fact, there are other reasons why. In fact, in Europe, there has been a move to ban diclofenac as a human drug because it also gets into watercourses and interferes with fish biology and breeding. So there are other knock-on effects that diclofenac has, which are undesirable, but it hasn't been enough to effect a ban in Europe either. Despite some, about 6 years ago, I thought it might actually happen, but it didn't. So yes, becoming inert, I don't think that's really relevant. But one just to recap, because one thing that confuses people sometimes is that you think that if after 3, 4, 5 days after treatment of a cow, it's basically all excreted from the cow. So it comes out in the urine and feces and goes right through the animal, and then the cow is then safe again for a vulture to eat it if it died later. But if you have a dead cow and it's got diclofenac in it, keeping it for 3, 4, 5 days and then feeding it, that it will still be in the tissues because it won't have been excreted. So that's just a sort of a slightly potentially confusing aspect of what you need to do. So for people wanting to provide a carcass at a feeding station, for example, if you don't know whether a cow has been treated or not within the last few days, you could be feeding, a highly toxic carcass, and doing the tests on that carcass for diclofenac are really quite difficult and quite a technically difficult thing to do, reliably anyway. So unless you really know the medical history of that cow, there's a risk to feeding it. So sorry, probably not quite what I was asked, but I hope that's of interest.
Sure. Right, thank you. Next question is from JVD Murthy. Curious and interested to know the current status of the California condor. What is the major threat to their decline in numbers?
Yes, very interesting question. They are, I don't remember the exact figures, but the population is growing steadily. but it's only growing steadily because of, I mean, a hugely expensive recovery program that's going on there. You know, compared to what we're doing here in India is expensive. It's what is it? 8 crore a year for. But California Condor program costs multiple times more. But the ongoing threat, and the threat that's emerged actually since they started, they didn't really know what the main threat was when they started doing breeding program there. But it's emerged that it is absolutely clear. It's lead shot poisoning. So people who are shooting deer are sometimes wounding a deer, and the shot from the gunshot disperses in the body of the deer, and then the condors find dead deer, and if one's been wounded and dies later, that's the worst possible one. But even if it's been shot and butchered by the hunter, and they leave parts of it behind, those parts can be highly toxic to the condors. So the only reason that the condor population is still increasing, and it is increasing quite nicely, but the only reason for that is because they're recapturing a number of the birds each year and removing toxic lead from their system and then re-releasing them. So it's and they've got the parallels with diclofenac are quite interesting actually. That they got people, the shooting lobby, of course, in the US is incredibly powerful and very resistant to any change. But you can use non-lead alternative ammunition, and they're trying to get voluntary bans in place, but they're not really working. You know, there's enough hunters who don't want to change, and so that lead is still the main issue going on there. But it's I'm guessing it's something like 400 birds, I think now, in total, but I don't remember the exact figure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question, this is from AVK, I don't have the whole name. What is the environmental impact of reduction of vulture population from 40 million to very few thousands now?
Right. Okay, well, as I alluded to, I think probably the biggest single one is that it has allowed feral dog populations to increase in some areas, but it's also had, in many areas, cattle carcass disposal has just had to change, and there have been a lot of burying, and the bone collectors who used to they really appreciated the fact that the vultures did a good job, and they say that the dogs don't do a nice job of cleaning up carcasses for the bones. But having said all that, all these things are changing and are dynamic with changing practices, and of course there's an increasing number of people in India now consume meat as well. So that is, and there are other uses for the dead cows, which are slightly increasing. So it's a very and to generalize right across India is not possible, but also getting the full story of it, and of course you're going back in time and trying to get information from when the vultures were more abundant is quite hard. but those are probably the ones that stand out to as the main ones. But,
right. Okay, Chris. The next
great question.
Right. Okay, I'm going to combine 2 or 3 questions which I think are all about human diclofenac being administered to cattle.
Yes.
Questions from JVD Murthy, Humayun Taher, and I think Gitanjali has also mentioned something along the same lines. I'll just combine these for you.
Okay.
Is diclofenac meant for humans administered to cattle? Maybe the pharma companies in India could be sensitized to the issue. That's one. The second one is, how about making it mandatory to print warning labels on the packaging? And there is also something about the letter from DGCI which says that there should be a warning. Is that implemented? Even if it is, what prevents the vet from bulk buying over the counter? Right? And Gitanjali has also added something along the same lines. Is it unauthorized use of banned medicines by cattle owners the main cause?
Okay, I'm not sure about that. Let me answer some of that, and you can tell me what I've missed.
Sure.
So, actually, in what was it, 2009 or 10, we and BNHS requested the drug controller to put a mandatory warning on human diclofenac, which was done. And if, in fact, yeah, I haven't checked recently, but if you do buy human diclofenac, there is a minute warning in English that says not for veterinary use. So that is stated. And technically, it is an imprisonable offence to purchase human diclofenac for veterinary use, to use it in veterinary use, and certainly to administer it. But there has not been a single prosecution on this, despite the fact that we have good data from that. I mean, there's a lot more work that I haven't had chance to talk about, but sampling cattle carcasses all around the country for the levels of diclofenac, it has been, shows that diclofenac is still being illegally used. So yes, we know that human diclofenac is being used by vets, and we've also, we've got some people who know vets well enough to get the real story. They get the little 3 ml vials and package them together in packs of 5, and sell them as packs of 5 deliberately. So I mean, that is an imprisonable offence technically, but there's never been a prosecution. But there's another part of your question that I might have missed.
Just a moment.
I didn't quite catch the last bit, but I think I've covered.
Last one. Yeah, I think we've covered what was mentioned in these questions. Yes.
Yes.
So,
well, just a further point on that, and a further complication of it, is that when you're sampling diclofenac in dead cows now, if it was aceclofenac, I said that converts into diclofenac inside the cow. It's actually difficult to tell whether it started out as aceclofenac or whether it started out as human diclofenac. So that's a complication. Sometimes you can tell in some cases, and where there's a bit of aceclofenac, but because it doesn't all metabolize immediately to diclofenac. So just to highlight that it's not quite as straightforward.
Right. So it's possible for somebody to claim that it was actually aceclofenac that was administered.
Good question. I believe it is. But I mean, in fact, it doesn't come to that, because the time lag in all of these things is quite great. And getting these samples analysed reliably, even for diclofenac, we've got Eurofin's laboratory here in Bangalore, actually, that do it commercially, and they're good at it and reliable at it. But it's quite easy to do these tests and not be 100% reliable. But all of that takes, in reality, it takes months before we get the. But in a couple of cases, in fact, in the Madhya Pradesh vulture safe zone, we managed to collect a good number of cattle carcass samples, and we knew the carcass dumps that they came from, and got those. Had to drive all the samples down to Bangalore, get them analysed, and get the results. And then it turned out that there were 3 carcass dumps where diclofenac was still being used, and the team knew the vets in those areas, and they could then go back to those vets and politely highlight that they knew that somebody had been using diclofenac in that area. And that was a really nice way of being able to start to give feedback, but still no prosecutions, and it's still, a long process. That still took several months.
Right. Right. Next question, Chris. I don't have the name of the person. He's asking, no vulture safe zone in South India.
Yeah. No, and that's a good comment. As I say, Arulagam has got a preliminary effort going on in Tamil Nadu, but lacks sufficient support to really get that up and running fully. But it's very active in a number of ways, and I'm really impressed by what they've achieved. But absolutely, and I've been hoping that we could someone would come forward and take it up as a program, as a theme elsewhere in South India, because I think, and I mean, I didn't go into more detail, but a vulture safe zone normally has some sort of population of vultures at the center of it, and then a 100-kilometer radius around that is the sort of area where you would focus all the attention. Any suggestions for someone interested? I throw that open. But actually, did the questioner say any more?
No, that is all that he has mentioned. But just, you may not be aware, somebody from Arulagam is on this call.
Great. Yeah.
Maybe I could request you to unmute yourself and, add something if you would like to.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yes. This is Bharaidasan from Arulagam.
Oh, nice.
Hi, Bharti.
Yeah, hi. Do you need a video call also?
We can see you.
Yeah.
I think you'll have to stop screen sharing for that, Chris.
What do I do? Yes.
You'll have to stop screen sharing.
Okay, fine. Yeah. I can do that. Stop sharing. Yeah, great. Is that
okay?
Is that okay?
Yes.
Mr. Bharti, please go.
Good evening, Chris, and all the members who are listening. It is a wonderful opportunity. In Tamil Nadu, we have initiated vulture safe zone with the priorities of based on the safe blueprint, and it is pioneered in Nepal. We have adopted certain concept and implementing in Tamil Nadu level, and this Tamil Nadu is not only Tamil Nadu. We have to focus on adjacent state also, Karnataka and Kerala also. We have to focus. But we have limited resource, so we are now confined to work in and around Tamil Nadu, Nilgiri Biosphere Zone. But we are planning to upgrade our work now. It's underway, Fortunately, Tamil Nadu government supported in animal husbandry department supported in some good way of removing harmful drugs. Now we are also focusing on carcass poisoning related issues and improving the availability of safe food. This kind of work is in aligning with, based on the safe blueprint. Hopefully, it will be a full vulture safe zone in coming 2-3 years. We hope that. Yes. Thanks for inviting me to give my views on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Okay, this question is also about the status of vulture conservation, this time in the state of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. This is from AVK. Chris?
Well, I think there's obviously very small populations, and long-billed vultures have been found in some of them more recently in Telangana in particular. But it is very small populations, and going north from there is even less sign of current populations. So no, it's interesting, and again, I don't fully understand why they've completely disappeared from those areas to the north of Hyderabad. But and I'd be interested in any suggestions on that. I mean, I know that there were some major cyclones which may have had some impact, but yes, I can't say that I know the detail, and there are probably people on this call who know more about it than I do specifically.
Right. Okay, maybe once we're done with all the questions, we can throw it open if somebody wants to add something to that.
Great, yes.
Okay, just moving on to the next question then. There's a question from Asif. Before the use of diclofenac, what was the common drug used for cattle?
Yes. Gosh, the name's gone out of my head. There was a very common drug. The name will come to me, and it's never been tested for its safety, but we assume the fact that it was quite commonly used. Gosh, I must be tired. I can't remember the name of it. If anyone can put it in the box there. Analgin, yes, sorry, analgin.
Analgin.
It came in the end. Yeah, so analgin was very much the one that was used before, but clearly the vets found it much less effective and quick acting, and I mean, diclofenac, because it has various properties of not only reducing swelling but also reducing fever. Antipyretic is the technical term, I believe, so replacing it with another drug that's got that similar combination of properties, and that's one reason why I'm quite excited about tolfenamic acid, because I believe it has got many similar properties. Meloxicam also does, but is slower acting and doesn't have so much antipyretic property. So, but in fact, meloxicam works for longer and it has less side effects. So, in some ways, meloxicam is better, but the vets. But because it's slower acting, it means the vet doesn't look so good so quickly, and of course, yeah, they want something that works faster. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and there are other sort of herbal remedies that are used in some cases, but yes, analgin is the main answer.
Right. Okay. Question from JVD Murthy. What are the major hurdles encountered during captive breeding?
Yes. Gosh. Quite a few. First of all, getting permission and willingness for people to collect the birds in the first place. Not everyone was very happy at the idea. That was one thing. Getting the funding, getting people to believe that we would know how to breed them. A lot of skepticism around initially. We had all sorts of things thrown at the programme. We had floods at centres. We had bee attacks early on, which swarm of bees killed 4 of the birds, which was and the vulture keepers were absolutely heroic in trying to save some of the birds, but getting stung all over. So various things. We did have one official who had better remain nameless, but who was very sceptical and tried to undermine the programme early on, which was very difficult to deal with, but came through in the end. But and I think I think actually going back to the creation of SAVE, and in terms of agreeing that it really was a step that was needed, and getting everyone behind it, that it took quite a long while. And I think, even now, of course, now we're at the stage where it's costing a lot of money, and some people would argue that money could be better used in other ways for vultures, although I'm not quite sure exactly what you would do. But in fact, for RSPB, who I work for, we're an NGO, and we don't normally do captive breeding. It's not the sort of thing we would do except in absolutely extreme circumstance. And so taking that on has been a big deal for us too, and in the end it's ended up taking up a disproportionate amount of the resources as well, which doesn't always but I think, and one really interesting thing about it is that these releases are now going to be testing the safety of the environment by satellite tracking the birds and really knowing what happens to them. And if they did die of diclofenac poisoning or anything else, we will know, and we will be in a very strong position and high profile attention on what might be needed to address that. So, it's not the reason that we originally agreed to go for the breeding program, but it's ending up as being a really important reason for keeping it going and taking it to fruition. In Nepal, where things are going rather well, we're now getting the authorities rather upset because we want to close down the centre. And they're saying, no, we don't want to do that. But actually, if those population trends continue, that is job done, and that is the objective of a conservation breeding program. It's not to create a zoo, effectively. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and one that provokes a lot of discussion.
Right, Umesh,
I think JVD wants to add something to that.
Yeah, just to this.
Yes.
Is imprinting also a hurdle that has to be overcome?
It is. It was something we were very worried about initially. And actually, when you've got small number of birds breeding, it is more of an issue. But we've been able to, taking great care not to, openly feed birds or for the association. So we have taken care, but we don't now go as far as using models and things like that, which is used in some cases. but that doesn't seem to be necessary because we've got other birds, so they can imprint on each other by keeping them together.
All right.
And we've got second generation birds breeding with each other, so we know that it's working. So yep, it was a concern and one that we've been able to definitely overcome. So, but something that is it has to be thought of at every stage. And yes, I mean, for some of the zoos which have smaller populations, that could be an issue, and you could fall into the trap of ending up with imprinted birds if you're not careful. So,
and this can apply across species, right? This problem imprinting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question is from Jayashankar. Can we monitor the nesting sites of vultures regularly during the breeding season?
Yes. The answer is yes, definitely. With care, obviously, because vultures are really, not only have they got amazingly good eyesight, but they are very cued in to things which happen, which are different. And they, we've found that, a change of keeper or different activities at the breeding center, and the birds will stop eating for a week. They will refuse to feed, and it's all sorts of reasons why the birds can be sensitive. But you definitely can monitor nests from a distance, and with careful vantage points and things, and doing that right from the beginning of the season, and knowing whether the breeding success level is a very important thing to do. But what is often a big challenge is, because these birds are very, very mobile, and particularly white rumped vulture. I mean, long-billed vulture obviously are more or less always breed on cliffs. I mean, very occasionally they will use trees, but so they are tied to cliff nesting sites. But with white rumped vultures and red-headed vultures, which are tree nesting, they can switch trees between seasons or even within season, and using nest monitoring as a population monitoring tool needs extra care in terms of interpreting the trends from that. I mean, if you've got really small population and you really have got a good clear handle on all the birds in an area, then it may be feasible. But there are dangers of using it and in fact, I mean, we had this in the Nepalese area where there was a lot of nest monitoring going on, and the number of nests they were finding kept going up, but we never really knew whether it was truly an increase or better detection levels. But although it did go down again, but so yes. Does that answer your question,
Jody?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
It does, but not entirely.
Yeah, well, it's a very big question on how exactly how you do it, and how you standardize. If you are wanting to use it as a population monitoring method, that is a much bigger question, and we would need to talk for a lot longer.
A lot longer, yes, I agree. That's the reason I said not entirely, but yes.
Yes, okay.
So there are other dimensions to this.
We're on the same page, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So let's move on to the next question then. This is a question from Rajshekhar. Will no-go zones help for vultures? to ban diclofenac. Actually, we have Rajshekar here. Maybe we can ask him to unmute and
Yes, sir.
elaborate.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Rajshekar.
This is the special cover I got released. It was lobbied between the Telangana government. The special cover for the vulture conservation is released in 2017 for the Wildlife Conservation Week. At this August forum, I'm saying. But my question is, for conserving vultures in areas like Ramnagar, suppose vultures have an aerial distance of, as you said in the earlier question, 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers aerial distance flying zone. So, at the part containment zones, so can it be enforced with the local municipalities? So, like, this is absolutely a conservation zone, so that the diclofenac or any of these near variables can be banned. So.
Well, this is exactly the idea behind a vulture safe zone, is to do exactly that. And Ramnagara is, I mean, because it's such a sort of well-known place and, you know, relatively accessible, I think it would fit very well for doing it, even though it's a perilously small population that we have there. And in fact, I did have a chance to visit this week, but yeah, I mean, it's just one pair really of long-billed and one of Egyptian. But when you start putting 100 kilometer, even 100 kilometer radius, that is a huge number of vets and of pharmacies to really enforce that. And in fact, it does seem that those birds from Ramnagara probably go to the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary area and over, you know, down towards the south and southeast from there. And you know, understanding that is really crucial, because you don't want to put all your efforts to the north in enforcing that, because it's a big ask to do it. If the birds are always going in another direction, you could focus your efforts. And in fact, I've been hoping that we can get some diet analysis work. There's some Moshmi Ghosh at NCBS is doing some diet analysis. And that will be really interesting to find out what those birds are eating, because whether it is still a high proportion of domestic you know, cattle, or is it all spotted deer and wild ungulates? You know, that would be such an informative thing to know, and I'm hoping we might get some answers on that. But so I think what you're asking is exactly what a vulture safe zone is intended to achieve. And if it can have some stronger support from Forest Department in terms of you know, really making sure that diclofenac and these other drugs, I mean, because these other drugs are still in legal use, it's difficult. You know, nimesulide, we are, you know, 99% sure it's a killer, but we haven't done the direct testing. IVRI hasn't done the direct testing, but there has actually been now some preliminary tests in South Africa on a surrogate Gyps species, and I'm afraid it killed them. So it's looking really bad for nimesulide. But you know, that is, it's a lot to undertake, but I think this is what it needs, and doing it on a local scale. You know, if we can then demonstrate that it works, can be a lesson and you know, a premise for doing it on a wider state level or national scale to enforce those bans. But it is quite a big ask, unfortunately. So, Does that?
Yes, also, and I'll add one point. I'll try to chip in because I have interface with the pharma industry in Bangalore. I try to sell this idea of carrying out the clinical studies, and UAV Bangalore. You can also rope in the agriculture university where they have an inroads into the rural industry.
Yes.
And the social impact studies can be done to disengage people from diclofenac. This is my question.
Thank you. I'd like to talk to you more about any pharmaceutical contacts you have. Please.
I will share with you. I'll share with you. Like all my contacts for the vulture conservation.
Yes, please. We know we need to do a lot more with pharmaceutical industry. So,
yes,
but we're not experts in knowing exactly what to do. So,
pleasure interacting. I met you 20 years before, and in 2006 I met you in Jagan's
okay,
Lanka sanctuary.
Right. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, great. That is nice. Okay, the next question is from JVD Murthy. Similar to what is being done in the condor cases, the removal of lead, is it possible to use a similar technique or method to flush out diclofenac from the vulture's insides? In fact, I also had a sort of...
no, it's a very important question. And because the way that diclofenac works, and it builds up over a couple of days, and then these crystals cause the kidney failure. Yeah, I mean, I think if you knew that a bird had taken in diclofenac and was not well, and in fact we have had some cases of this, although it's been difficult to prove absolutely 100%, but by taking them in and basically giving them lots of fluids, so some birds recover, but actually really knowing that that's what's happened, because it's not been done on an experimental basis, but logically it seems to be the case that just flushing lots of fluids is the pragmatic, at least, solution to trying to help a bird which has had some, and that would apply to other NSAIDs as well, I would think. But I'm speaking out, beyond my own real expertise here. But yeah.
So that means monitoring has to be very extensive and intensive, both.
Monitoring of the drugs, you mean?
Of the birds, for the symptoms, which means then again we go back to that point of dietary analysis that you had raised earlier.
Yes, well that will be helpful, won't it?
Yes.
It will be. But yes, I mean, actually having a lot of birds satellite tagged and knowing what wild birds do routinely would be helpful. And there are some proposals to do more satellite tagging, and I would support those. But if somebody is doing satellite tagging, I think the biggest priority is that you've got somebody who's alert, not just the sort of analysing it months later and drawing a map, but who would be alert if that bird died, to try and get there and find out what it died of, because that would be the top priority in my mind of something that needs doing as a result. And yeah, I think some satellite tagging in South India would be very welcome, of any of the species, and nobody's really done longbills at all so far.
But that brings you back to the same point again: funding.
Funding, yep, funding. But you've got the extra one with satellite tagging of permissions.
Yes, that's the other problem.
And you do, and also satellites attaching these tags. You need people who really know what they're doing, because it's also quite easy to compromise a bird if you don't know what you're doing.
Yes, thank you.
Right. We have a comment from Sheikh Hussain, who I believe was
Yes.
your coordinator at Telangana, right? He is on the call. Sheikh Hussain, would you like to unmute yourself? Hussain, can you hear me?
Having technical issues like I did.
He is on the call. I think he is not able to unmute himself. Just give me a moment.
Is that?
You can actually unmute yourself, Hussain.
I'm just asking because I can see he's still showing me as mute. So maybe he's not sure how to.
Yeah, I know.
Yes,
No,
I had
actually
trouble unmuting.
Yeah, it seems to be a little erratic.
Hello?
Okay, let me read out the comment for the time being.
Hello?
There he is. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Hussain.
I'm Hussain here. Someone was asking about the populations of Telangana and Hyderabad.
Population in the Hyderabad breeding center.
So population in Hyderabad breeding center, it is presently with 7 males and 5 females. 4 or 5 females. Breeding, it has been started in 2010 and we got eggs in 2013 and 2016, but the hatchlings could not survive for longer period. So we don't know what could be the reason, but still the breeding center is trying for that. And the next question is about the population of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. We have one breeding center in Bejur, which everyone knows. So like we have breeding population of somewhere around 30 or 30 plus individuals. So this population could be from Maharashtra side also, which could be migrating during breeding season. But they are permanent residents we are having. But we need to find out on the other side also what is the population there. And so census and survey population here in this state along with all the South Indian states. So Arligam is coordinating that, and we are trying to do it in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh also. Most probably it would come because of this COVID-19. This has been postponed, and we will be most probably with the help of Deccan Birders also, and we are trying to involve. I would like to get involved with many of the birders and friends here for this population survey. So we have some population in Amrabad, Nagarjun Sagar, Srishalam Tiger Reserve, in Domalpenta, Tummalabailu, but these are like individual which have been cited, and paper has been published 2-3 times by me. From past 10 years I had been monitoring. So only Egyptian vulture is regularly found because it is found in municipal dump yards in Kisara, Mahavir Harina Vanasthali, and even near to some Kinnarsani also. Some places it has been, some good population has been found out. The rest of population is down. And in the case of my case of research, I can say that other than diclofenac, we have the problem of not having food availability and not having safe vulture nesting sites. That could be the reason of vulture decline here in this our states in Deccan Plateau. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hussain.
Thanks, Hussain. Yeah, good to hear.
Yeah. Good to hear, Chris.
Okay, another question from Mr. C.S. Devadas. Could any of those vultures that were bred under human supervision, could they survive after they were released in the wild?
I have every expectation that the answer is yes. We have, well, the Nepalese releases, we've now had the first ones have just been released that have been bred in the centre, and so far so good. They're doing fine. They've integrated with local birds there, and one bird has actually paired up. Looks like it's pairing up with a wild bird. So the signs are good, but it's still early. Do follow the story on the SAVE website, because we're putting periodic updates on that, and hopefully by the end of this year we'll start to be in a position to do the same for India too.
Right, that's great. Okay, I think this is the last question. This is from Mr. Baiju. He says he's heard incidents of overuse of pesticides on agriculture inside the reserves, thereby leading to death of elephants and unintentional poisoning of vultures. I haven't actually seen any reports. So he would like to ask you any similar information from anywhere other than here.
Yes. So that's and hi Baiju, nice to hear from you. That's
Mr. Baiju is here actually.
Yes, I mean, maybe if he can explain a bit more, but if my understanding is right, he's saying that it's so it's quite accidental that those pesticides have ended up killing elephants or other animals, because I haven't heard of that specifically in other parts. I've heard of people deliberately poisoning other mammals, elephant, leopard, cows, tigers, and then that being, and dogs as well. That in other parts of India and in Cambodia. But Baiju, would you want to say any more on that?
Hi, Chris. Good evening.
Hi
all. I just want to tell you one incident which happened like a few months back in Satyamangalam. There were a death of around 4 vultures there, which hasn't been reported officially anywhere. People from SACON has collected samples and they found some very, high percentage of pesticides in the vultures. And I think they are waiting for the publication to come out, which happens almost a year or so. Possibly these things will be forgotten by us, or the department will never come to know, because for them birds is nothing. When elephants are dying almost on a routine now, like 12 elephants in last 3 months in this area. So I mean, you can see the difference, like what will be the importance of vultures then for them. So I'm a bit worried, like whether are we going to hide this, or are we going to have any check on the use of very high poisons or pesticides, which could lead to the death of even elephants.
Yes. Okay. So
I just want to know that whether we have. I mean, this is basically, as you know, from this area. So I'm just wondering whether you have found any reports from any other places, any other South Asian places.
So, but just to clarify, was it deliberate that these pesticides reached the elephants, or was it accidental?
No, it was on their agriculture field they have done. They're just crop raiding elephants, so they eat and they just die. That's it.
I see.
Unintentional. That's what I said.
So right, totally unintentional. Okay, that I haven't come across that, but I'm very interested to hear it, and something that, I'll be looking for that.
It's really worrying. It's really worrying because you know the number of populations inside, like 54 tribal populations are there in these 2 tiger reserves. So you can just imagine the amount of, agriculture area, area of agriculture, as well as the usage of pesticides.
No, that's very interesting and could be very significant. But just to add on the pesticides front and poison baits issue. I don't know whether other people have heard about this, but the Ministry of Agriculture has put a notification for the ban of 27 pesticides, which includes carbofuran, which is one of the notorious killers of, one that people use as a poison bait for carnivores and other, which ends up having the knock-on effect of killing a lot of vultures. So very welcome news that they're planning to ban these 27, and we've written letters of support just last week to hoping that the drug companies don't manage to overturn that. So deliberate poisoning than this that you're describing, which is accidental, and that's very thing. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris.
For the benefit of those who don't know, Baiju has recently released a book called The Valley of Hope for Vultures on the Moyar Valley.
He has, and I've just read it.
Baiju, maybe, could you please share your contact details on the chat? I think there would be other people also who would like to.
Yeah, definitely I'll do.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I think that is it as far as the questions are concerned. JVD, would you like to add some closing remarks?
No, it's an amazing talk. There's still loads of questions to be answered, not yet. Of course, obviously, this is enormous. The problem is enormous. I mean, as enormous as the bird itself. Getting around the problems is not easy. The gun lobby in the West is pretty strong, so it's very difficult to ban guns over there, not to use lead and so on. We have a pharma industry here, which is again very powerful, again a powerful lobby. You can't simply walk up to them and tell them, don't do this, don't produce this. This is what gets them their money and finances and stuff. So it's going to be a long drawn battle. We can just hope that the vultures and the people involved, like Chris here, and the organizations that he's working with, are successful in bringing back the vultures. Maybe we may not achieve the 40 million number.
No.
But anything in the 40s and 50,000s would be good enough, I guess, for the moment.
Yeah, I think we're battling with extinctions, and yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it?
That is a word that I think as birders and conservationists we really hate. It's much more deadlier than the Corona-19 going around.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much from me and from all of us here at Deccan Birders. Fantastic session. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Very, very enlightening. And we certainly look forward to engaging with you again very soon.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for some really very nice questions. Very, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris, and stay safe.
Likewise.
Take care. Thank you.
Everyone. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you all.